Hey, good morning. I'm Playbook co-author Eugene Daniels. It is Friday. Friday, glorious Friday, as if that means anything anymore. November 8th. And what's driving the day today is still all of the side effects from Tuesday's election. The Democratic Party soul searching their blame game about really, very likely, depending on what happens with the remaining House races, possibly having no real influence in Washington, D.C. come January. And the Trump administration's transition and what all this tells us about Trump 2.0. So, what now? Joining me now to talk about all of this is my girl and Playbook co-author, Rachael Bade. Rachel, hello.
Eugene, I'm so
You
tired.
made it.
I can
You
barely
made
see
it.
straight. I just hope I
But you
can
look good,
string.
girl. But you
Oh, I
look
don't know.
good.
That's called makeup, yo.
It's concealer, just a little concealer right here
Right
under
under
these
the eyes.
eyes,
Cover
too.
those bags.
Yeah, as soon as I wipe this off, it's gonna scare somebody.
Yeah.
Um, I want to start with some news that broke last night. President-elect Trump announced that Susie Wiles will be his White House chief of staff, his first big announcement since Tuesday. She, of course, was his campaign manager, has a long history in Republican politics, especially in Florida. She's someone who folks give credit for kind of reviving Trump's political operation after 2020. What are you hearing from Republicans here in Washington about the pick? And do you think it tells us anything about the direction about the new administration?
Yeah, look, I mean, Republicans across the board are thrilled for one basic reason, Eugene, and that is because Wiles is not afraid to play bad cop with Trump when she
Yeah,
needs to.
yeah,
I mean, one of the
yeah.
biggest criticisms from the larger party of Trump's inner circle for the past 8 years has been that he sort of surrounds himself with yes men, people who do not tell him what he doesn't want to hear. A lot of people talk about Mark Meadows in that role, or go even further and sort of feed into what a lot of Republicans see as his worst impulses. People like Steve Bannon, Corey Lewandowski. Susie is not one of those. I mean, we have seen reporting across the board about how she has tried to keep him on message, how she has confronted him on things like bringing Laura Loomer onto the plane when he did that during the campaign. She confronted him in September when he was sort of going off the rails, questioning Kamala Harris's biracial heritage and just saying things that were shooting himself in the foot. She was the one who sort of took the drama happening in the campaign around Corey Lewandowski to Trump and said he needed to fix it, and eventually got Lewandowski sort of sidelined. And part of the reason she can do this, Eugene, is because, as you mentioned, she was one of the first operatives to sort of go and work for him when he was a pariah in the party
Yeah,
after
yeah.
January 6th. And because of that, Trump views her as extremely loyal, and that's extremely important to her.
That's as
Obviously,
good as it gets for him, is extreme loyalty, right? Like he sees her someone who has his back.
exactly. And
Yeah,
as you mentioned, the campaign has been credited this time around with having this sort of professional
yeah.
demeanor and more solid structure. She's very much an operator who gets things done. One of the questions I have, though, is, Donald Trump, he doesn't like to be managed. And in fact, there's been some reporting about how at various times during this campaign, he got frustrated. He felt like he wasn't having fun, that he was being overmanaged. And it wasn't that he put, Susie Wiles to the side or anything like that, but there was a time when he wasn't really heeding her. So we'll just have to see, I mean, Republicans are really happy she's there. They think she can make sure that he is successful in his presidency. How long will she hold on when it was really a question about whether she even wanted this role in the first place, Eugene?
Yeah. She has it now, so she gonna have to do it. I will say something that's really interesting. First woman in American history
Oh,
to
yeah.
be chief of staff, which
That's
is
crazy. Can I just say that's crazy?
crazy. That's
Where
absolutely
are the
damn
ladies?
bananas.
Where
That's
okay,
crazy.
not
And
your
it's not
first
like the
female
women,
president, but your
not the
first
first female
female
president,
chief.
chief of
Yes.
staff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a new role for the American people.
So let's talk about the other side, because while I've been sort
Yeah.
of reporting on the GOP side here, Eugene, I know you have been talking about the losing end and talking to the
Yes.
losing end,
Yes,
specifically a
exactly.
lot of Democrats in recent days. So
Yeah.
who gets blamed for this disastrous showing for the party? I mean, a lot of people are pointing at Joe Biden, but what are
Hmm.
you hearing from people right now? I'm sure they're furious.
They're blaming everybody. The fingers are so furious right now, Rachel, that it's going to take them a very long time to figure out at the end of the day, what they really think is a problem, because they actually have to find a solution to what we saw, right? There's a lot of blame to Joe Biden, right, for taking so long to drop out, for even running in the first place for reelection, right? The American people, Democrats made it very clear in polling since day one that they did not want him to run for reelection, right? The party apparatus decided to ignore the will of the voters and do it anyway, right? And that's so they see that as I think he's problem number one, I think, for them, in a lot of folks' eyes. Two, people look at the actual campaign, right? A lot of people give Vice President Harris. I haven't heard one Democrat who was like, "Oh, she ran a shitty campaign," right? They look at getting a 107-day campaign, and people start like nitpicking the kinds of things, like maybe she should have done Joe Rogan, maybe, or in podcasts in general, doing that more. They may have missed the idea that this was a podcast election and should have been doing that more. Should she have moved away from Biden more, and what that would have done? Would that have made people who have issues with the economy feel differently about it? Would that have made people who had issues with the administration's Middle East policy feel better and maybe come out for her in a different way? I will say I've talked to a lot of Black women about this, about the idea of Vice President Harris like turning her back on Joe Biden, whether or not he, kind of told her that it was okay. And they think that that would have backfired on her. We'll never know a lot of the answers to these questions, but that is how folks are reading it. You have folks looking at the messaging from Democrats for years, not just in this campaign, but Bernie Sanders, for example, and a lot of other folks, whether or not the Democratic Party is speaking to working people. But then you have people who say, who do we mean when we're talking about working people? Are we talking about white working people? Are we talking about Black working class? Are we talking about the Latino working class, right? Who are you talking about? So it's all over the place. I will say there's a lot of operatives who think they need some kind of autopsy, right? This happened in 2012 with Republicans after Mitt Romney's loss. They didn't listen
No,
at
they
all
didn't.
to what was in there, but they did it. And so they're thinking like, what does it look like to do some kind of blue ribbon something or other and try to get it all? And then, Democrats are very nerdy. And so get it in like a big document they can all send around and think about. But at the end of the day, it was not a repudiation of the Democratic Party every single place, right? Democrats did win in some Senate places in Senate races that Harris lost that state, Michigan being one of them. So it's about trying to figure out the message and then actually figure out the policies when you're actually in office to make voters feel better. And then there's the culture. But at the end of the day, Rachel, I frankly think any Democrat that ran against Donald Trump would have lost.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree totally.
The way that if there was a really good graphic that showed which counties went right, which counties went left. The amount of counties that went to the right over the last 4 years which is like red everywhere, all up and down the map of the United States. And so, if you put Gretchen Whitmer out there, if you put Josh Shapiro out there, it is a Democratic Party brand that seemed to be the problem for them on Tuesday, and the issue that voters have with them. So it's cultural, it's political, and they're going to have 2.5 years really of figuring out before they start a new primary to figure out what actually happened. But it's going to take some real soul searching. Frankly, some people I talked to today feel like they're not sure if the party's ready for those kind of hard truths in what's in the data, what could be in the data.
I totally agree with you. I think, all the griping and finger pointing, it's fruitless right now, because it doesn't matter who the candidate was. The voters sent a very clear signal, and it was that they didn't like what the Democratic Party was selling right now. And so an autopsy, that's interesting. I'm sure they're going to do that. They've got to figure out what they're doing wrong in terms of messaging and policy proposals. Do we know at this point what the most compelling case is for how to fix the Democratic Party? And do we even think Democrats are going to be able to agree on that? Because I can already hear different voices out there suggesting, oh, we should have moved, further left, more in the form of the squad, which is more, as you mentioned, like working class people, et cetera. But that is also very different than, what you hear from centrists who are saying, oh, no. We shouldn't be moving further left. We got to move more to the center. Like, immigration, we got totally thumped on this. I mean, what's the answer?
They have no idea, right? And okay, sure, it's 2 or 3 days since the election, but I think that when you have a big tent party, you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of ideas. That is good if those people go out and vote. But then when you have to have like a family conversation about what actually is the problem, like what does that table look like, right? Like who's at that actual table? How do you make sure that there are enough progressives around the table for that argument to be put in that document? Make sure that enough moderates are there. How do you make sure enough people that were on the Harris campaign, on the iteration when it was the Biden campaign, people who weren't on the campaign? Where do you put Dean Phillips, right? Like there's all
Oh,
these
remember him?
people.
Yeah.
Remember Dean who was right. But like when you when you put when
Oh,
you put all of these people in a room, like what does that actually look like when you're building that room? But in a lot of the data, what we saw is that this current party, highly educated, more money. It is very different than the party that the Democrats seem to want to be. And honestly, where they talk about their policies, who are they for? So it is both, it is going to be a heavy lift for them. And then there's, people wondering how much race and gender were a part of people's calculations. But when you look at these huge different changes, all of these things matter. But I think, like I said, it's a full Democratic Party issue that this, like the brand is not good. And also, let's be real, Donald Trump is popular. Like the thing that I think is lost a little bit in this 2020, when Donald Trump lost, he lost like by tens of thousands of votes, right? Not hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of votes in a few different states. That is while hundreds of thousands of Americans were dying of COVID, right? And he was largely panned by Democrats and Republicans as not doing a good job with COVID. And he barely lost, right? And so it could also just be, they may overthink it. It could just be that Donald Trump's just so damn popular and his messaging is so good, right? And so then there's that element of it. How much of this is about Donald Trump? So they're going to have a lot of work to do and not
yeah.
a ton of time to do it, right? Like there's not a ton of time to actually figure that out, people to raise a lot of money to do a primary in a couple of years.
Yeah, the midterms start right now, Eugene.
The midterms already start. The people ain't even been sworn in, honey, and the midterms started. I saw a headline today that was like, possible 2028 Democratic nominees. I was like, can we get to Monday, please? Leave us alone.
Banish those
Let us
people.
rest. One of the things, Rachel, for Democrats, one of the really frustrating things is that they're on the verge of not having any leverage, maybe in Washington, D.C., depending on how this House thing shakes up, and no real check on the new Trump administration, right? Is Trump world feeling like that gives them more flexibility in picking people for key roles, right? We have Susie Wiles. There's going to be a lot of other people. And what's the vibe about, among Republicans on Capitol Hill? They're not back. They're back very soon. How are they feeling about the outlook for the new GOP agenda? Because if they get all three, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, they're related, clearly. And not just because, they have the numbers in the Senate to confirm who he wants to the cabinet and such, or, to the federal bench. But as you mentioned, it's because they feel like they have a mandate, because it wasn't just a victory. It was a total and complete thumping. I mean, growing his margins in blue states by double digits, winning over more minorities and more traditionally blue groups of voters than he did in 2020. They feel like the public sent a message to Democrats, and that is that they don't like what they're proposing. So they feel like they've got a mandate. And, I would sort of break this down into two things when it comes to the agenda. The first, it's sort of the easier bucket. This is going to be Trump's sort of executive orders. We're already hearing, plans for day one, cracking down at the border, sort of expelling undocumented migrants, if he can do that on his own without Congress, scaling back some, climate regulations, other things Biden did in the regulatory space, cleaning house with, federal employees who, Trump has never frankly trusted. But the other bucket on this is going to be a little harder. And that is sort of the legislative bucket here. I mean, Mike DeBonis, our boss, made a really good point that if you go back to 2017, there were about 140 House Republican members. All you need is 218 to pass
Yeah.
legislation. And they had run on repealing Obamacare for more than half a decade. It was
Yep.
why they thought they won. And even with that huge sort of cushion in the House, they were not able to pass Obamacare. I mean, they tried to pass it in the House, they failed. They eventually got it, but then it died in the Senate, even though they had the numbers
With
over
that
there.
one thumbs
So
down from Mr. John
yes,
McCain
John
himself.
McCain, God rest his soul. And now we're looking at a potential majority that is one member, two members. And we all know House Republicans like nothing more than knifing each other in the back. So good luck with passing legislation there. It's going to be really tricky. But the good news for them is that the big agenda item is something that largely unifies Republicans, and that is, taxes. I mean, the Trump era tax cuts, they're going to come due to expire sometime next year. And they want to use budget reconciliation to sort of fast track things through the House and Senate. And taxes are things that Republicans love to talk about. But then again, when you get into the details, it gets complicated. Things like the state and local tax deduction, which a lot of Republicans from high cost states or areas, they're supporters of this. It's more of a Democratic idea. But when you add something like that, you repel conservatives. So it is going to be tricky for them with the 1 or 2 seat majority. There's no sugarcoating that, Eugene.
Yeah. I mean, one question I have is how is and we may not know this because it's very early, but how is the Trump transition, the Trump team, thinking about who from the House Republican caucus, who from the House Republican conference he'd want to bring into the cabinet, right? I'm thinking about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. We reported at Politico that Elise Stefanik is on the list for UN ambassador. But if you take some of those people out, then you're talking about possibly losing the majority, at least for a little bit. So how do we know yet how the Trump team is thinking about those kinds of moves, or how they should be thinking about them?
They're going to have to, Eugene.
Yeah.
I mean, like if they have a 1 seat majority, I mean, it's really hard to see how they can take Elise Stefanik from the House. I mean, it's just the math isn't going to work out. If all of a sudden you have a split, 50-50 or something like this, Democrats will have real power and real leverage. So look, it's going to be tricky. I know a lot of House members sort of think of themselves as cabinet members. I mean, if you're not looking in the mirror, see yourself a president, maybe a cabinet member. I mean, another one is Congressman Waltz from Florida. I know he is eyeing either defense or CIA or state or something like this. And it's just going to be really tough for Trump to take any of those people. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but he's definitely going to have to watch that margin, Eugene.
Well, we'll have to leave it there so we can sleep.
Thank
you can
God.
sleep. Everybody sleeps. Maybe for a little bit. Everyone just behave this weekend. We'll get some rest. Rachel.
No breaking news, please.
No breaking news, please, God. No, we don't need it. Give America a break. All right, Rachel, girl, I'll see you on the other side.
All right.
You can find more of this conversation by listening to Playbook Daily Briefing wherever you get your podcasts. For more of our thoughts on this and what else you need to know today, read Playbook this morning at politico.com/playbook.